Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining this event. So, my name's Anna. I'm the director of Flight Free UK, and we are a charity that encourages people to travel without flying. What we do is this is part of our online event series. So, we run events throughout the year looking at different aspects of travel and aviation and climate. And this particular one is looking at the issue of over tourism and seeing if we can access the benefits of tourism whilst minimizing the harms. So we'll explore what those harms are, and we will see what solutions might be. So to introduce a couple of our team members, we've got Matthew and Matilda from the Flight Free UK team helping out. And we're going to be joined by Ben Lynham from the Travel Foundation, who will be helping us explore this topic. We were lined up to have a couple of travel writers joining us, so they may or may not pop in. If not, that's fine. We've got a few travel stories to share anyway. So yes, we'll see how we go. You're very welcome, everybody. If you are watching back after the event, hello, welcome. And if you have any questions for us, if you're here in the live event, please write them in the chat. If you are joining us after the event, please write them in the comments and we will come back to you. So to give a bit of background and outline the topic for discussion this evening, it's about tourism, as I've mentioned. Now, why are we discussing this? What are the issues? So I'm sure we all know what the benefits of tourism are, the things that tourism can bring us, and travel, understanding the world, understanding each other, and seeing some of the world, which is always a good thing for us as people. But there are many disadvantages and dangers to what has then become over tourism. One of them is impact on locals. So tourist hotspots are places where locals are priced out of housing. Landlords see that housing is much more lucrative if you can use it as a rental and a hotel rather than for locals. So people who've lived in communities for a long time, their whole lives, generations, are being priced out of those places. It also comes to the services. So you often find that there are water shortages in these places because water is prioritized for the hospitality industry and locals suffer from water shortages. Small businesses are often replaced in places where lots of tourists go, which not only is bad for local people, it also changes the character of the place that you're visiting, which kind of removes one of the reasons, I suppose, that we would even go there in the first place. So that's another bit of a problem. And we'll come to some specific stories that have been reported by journalists about those difficulties that locals find. And there's also the climate impact. So transport makes up half of the emissions from the tourism industry. A lot of that is flights, of course. And we find that top tourist destinations can be vulnerable to the effects of climate change. So, for example, ski resorts suffer from lack of snow because of our warming world. The Great Barrier Reef is being bleached because of the excess CO2 in the sea. Island nations are suffering from sea level rise. So there are nations around the world that are seeing some of their land literally disappear underwater. And of course, wildfires, which we've seen across Europe and even here in the UK, these are things that become more and more frequent and likely owing to climate change. So we have to be aware of that and understand how our flights contribute towards that. And then finally, looking at the social justice aspect. So a lot of places that are reliant on tourism, and especially international tourism, will be expanding and building airports, which is not good for local people in terms of a social justice issue. So often the land or the area around an airport is cheaper because it's not a desirable place to live in terms of noise pollution, air pollution, and congestion. But it's so we kind of see an inequality thing arising. People who are less able to access flights are the ones who are suffering the very real impact of living near airports, etc. So we really need to think about this and really consider what is the impact of our tourism. The concept of sustainable tourism has really been a thing for a very long time, and is becoming more talked about, which is great. We have to understand what that means and see if we can go a bit deeper, though, because often the conversation about sustainable tourism ends at take a reusable cup on your flight. We still are talking about reusing towels in hotels. These feel like the small things that need to become big things if we are to genuinely address the issues of tourism, over tourism, and the climate impact of tourism. So, of course, we won't be able to solve that problem this evening, but we can have a think about some of the potential solutions and see what the direction of travel should be. So let's start then with, actually, sorry, I should go to our panelist, Ben, and ask. So, Ben, you've joined us to join in this discussion from the Travel Foundation. So, would you like to please introduce yourself and explain what the Travel Foundation is, what you are trying to achieve, and a little bit about you, please?
Sure. Thanks, Anna. Thanks for having me here, and hello, everyone. Yeah, I'm Ben Lynham. I am Head of Communications and Research at the Travel Foundation. The Travel Foundation is a charity, an NGO. It's got offices in various places, Bristol being one of them, where I am. We've been around for something like 22 or 3 years now, I think it is. And we work with governments and we work with businesses, tour operators, generally at a fairly international level, to try to make tourism work best for destinations and for the planet as well, of course. Our two main focuses are on climate change impacts, both in terms of carbon emissions, but also climate adaptation for destinations, and also what we call equity, which we mean to as basically ensuring that the benefits of tourism do spread to residents fairly, so that they're basically getting a good deal from tourism. I hope that this conversation is going to be hugely relevant to my background and the work that we do. I mean, if you don't know too much about what we do, I mean, we publish research and trade white papers and that sort of thing, encouraging people to think differently about how tourism can be. We do offer things like training and that sort of thing too, to help people to do things differently. And then we try and basically pull together businesses and destinations, governments, to think about how they're developing tourism and try out new models, new ways of doing things. So that we can increase those benefits and minimize those other impacts.
Well, really vital work. Thank you so much, Ben, and thanks for joining us and bringing your insights to this event. And a reminder to everybody, if you have any questions that come up during the event, then please just add them to the chat and we will come to them after we've had our discussion. And I probably should also say the runtime of this event is 75 minutes. So we're going to spend about the next 40 or 50 minutes with the discussion, and then we'll come to questions. So if there are no questions, that's fine. We can all walk off early. But yeah, we'll dedicate about 25 minutes to hearing your questions, because that's often the most interesting part of an event like this. So thanks for joining us, and please do add your questions if you wish. So let's start just illustrating the issue, and we'll come to Matthew and Matilda, because we've been looking at some of the articles that are written by journalists who live in areas that are over touristed, if that's a word, and can report on those firsthand. effect. So, Matthew, are you the one who was looking at that I Have No Neighbours article?
Yes,
Yeah. So,
was.
hi, Matthew, welcome. And
Uh,
do you want to share with everybody a few of those quotes from that article? And I should just point out that this is an article written by Ashifa Kassam for The Guardian earlier this year. Over to you, Matthew.
yeah, so one particular example that I saw was in Barcelona, one retiree who, for more than a decade, had lived below two tourist flats, said she had become known to local police after years of calling them to break up parties that regularly stretched past 3 a.m. Um, and there was kind of a few other accounts from locals who really highlighted a loss of community and kind of um, basically being the only residents in a block of flats that were used for tourists.
Yeah, I think that's the main thing, isn't it, that we often hear? It's the housing is reserved or removed from locals to be put towards um, tourist tourist accommodation. Is there anything else from that article, or should we ask Matilda? Oops, you're on mute. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
um, Yeah, there was another quote that I had. It was so six locals who spoke to the Guardian from Lisbon and Barcelona highlighted fairly similar concerns about being surrounded by tourist flats, with lifts that are often broken from regularly hauling suitcases and cleaning carts, never-ending noise concerns as tourists party, slam doors and hold late-night gab sessions, and the disorienting experience of living with a relentless stream of strangers parading through the building's common areas.
That's really interesting, isn't it? The broken lift. I don't think we would have really ever considered that as an impact. But yeah, it does. That seems to be a common theme, that it just anonymizes a community that used to be a tight-knit community. Because of course, if your neighbors are changing every week, you're never going to get to know them. So okay, thanks for that, Matthew. Matilda, so have we there's an article about pushing back about against touristification across Europe. This is also written by Ashifa Kassam for The Guardian. So is there anything you want to share from that one?
Yeah, so there were a few reasons why tourists decide to sorry, residents decided to start protests. And you've mentioned some of these already, but in Ibiza there were droughts and there were rules for the residents, but not so much the tourists. So for example, um they weren't allowed like water in their public fountains, but villas, hotels, and luxury homes continued to fill their pools as there were no water restrictions for them. Um, Also, again, as you've mentioned, there was a soaring cost of living that left many workers living in vans, caravans, or tent. And also, historical names of places were changed to English names to benefit tourists, but it basically made the locals feel like they were the strangers in their own towns. A quote here was, "It's like the island's DNA is being transformed."
Wow, that's powerful as well, isn't it? Yeah, so you mentioned protests because I think protests in Barcelona and the Balearic Islands and Gran Canaria have been widely reported. I think last summer there were really loads. But I mean, Barcelona has been for years the place where there are many signs around saying tourists go home. So it feels like the Spanish islands and Spain particularly, but I think now we're seeing protests happening in Greece, happening in Italy as well. So that it seems to be a rising occurrence. So Ben, let's come to you just to see what your experience of the negative side of tourism is, and what stories you might have heard, or what what you have come across in your work, seeing what those negative aspects are.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Anna. I mean, there's a report that you guys might be interested in if you haven't seen it already, that we published just before COVID, actually, that was called "The Invisible Burden of Tourism," and that tried to highlight the many different potential negative impacts of tourism, and basically make the point that these impacts aren't well documented, particularly. So tourism has been really good at demonstrating its economic impact. And it was a conscious decision to do that, particularly from organizations like the World Travel and Tourism Council and the UN Tourism, UNWTO as it was. And an important piece of work for them, I think, to try to demonstrate to the world that tourism was an important industry that needed to be taken seriously. And so a lot of effort was put aside to try to kind of demonstrate this economic impact, 1 in 10 jobs and all these sorts of things. Um, but people haven't been routinely measuring the other side of the balance sheet. And that was what was exposed really in the invisible burden of tourism. And it did pretty much what you're describing here, really. It shows that, when tourism develops, these burdens don't really feel too bad. People can kind of manage them up to a point. But destinations have limits, and I think that that's the kind of hopefully one of the kind of key messages to kind of give tonight is that there are various limits, sort of for the social license, for environmental limits, et cetera, et cetera. And you have to respect those in a place, because as tourism grows, there's a very real risk that you're going to exceed one of those thresholds. And that's where you kind of, have issues that we're sort of describing now. So, I mean, climate was one of the bigger impacts that was flagged in our report. You've already mentioned the significant footprint that tourism has, and I don't think we should lose sight of that. More sort of destination specific. I mean, even things like, I mean, at a global level, we can sort of point to things like sewage, and often, this is again something that's not really often talked about, but the countries that actually have good processes for managing sewage are in many parts of the world that's just not there, and therefore this is kind of a pollution that's being pumped straight out into the sea. Um, I mean, maybe more sort of to the point around sort of the social side of things, which I think is often where we go with over tourism. Um, I mean, absolutely. It becomes a tipping point where people sort of feel that the priority has shifted to tourists, to visitors rather than to residents. That kind of makes people feel like they actually want to leave, as well as potentially also being kind of pushed out. So both of those sort of pressures are happening, and that's where you kind of then see the entire sort of city centres or historical centres of places sort of being stripped of kind of local activity. And then that's where this sort of accusation of touristification or dissification and that sort of thing comes in. But I guess, I mean, I'm sure we'll get onto this, but over tourism is always going to mean different things in different places. It's always helpful to be quite specific about what we actually think is the issue, because then if we understand that issue, there's potential to kind of address it. Because in some places it literally is too many people, maybe overcrowding sort of things, and you can't, a local can't get on a bus because there's far too many, tourists in front of them in the queue, and they just never get on. Or they just literally can't just walk through, some streets because, it's absolutely crowded with groups and all the rest of it. So that could be an issue. But then, elsewhere, as we sort of said, it could be something around housing, could be around just kind of general kind of cost of living, could be around the kind of quality of the jobs that are available, that sort of thing. Um, all very complicated things to talk about because, I mean, there are plenty of places that are suffering from some of those issues that may not have tourism, particularly as a driver. So I think we just have to always be careful when we talk about these things and think about them. Um, yeah, there's some complex kind of balanced kind of discussions that need to happen. I mean, even with things like short-term rentals that I know, you know, um, are very often a driver of this kind of over tourism, and particularly if they haven't, if they've kind of not been very well regulated. Um, Even there, it can often be a complex case where it may not be that some of this housing is going to be sort of purchased by local residents anyway, etc. I mean, that some studies have sort of shown that this isn't necessarily just a case of bring it back into the kind of housing stock and everything's going to be fine. That's not really to say that they're off the hook by any means. But I think we just, if as much as we can to have a kind of grey and nuanced discussion around this, the kind of the more interesting it gets, I think, in a way.
Definitely, yeah. And thanks for highlighting a couple of those extra points. It's as you say, it's very nuanced. We need to cover lots of aspects of this. But yeah, really interesting to focus on just environmental aspects that affect people in ways that we might not think, like the sewage consideration. And that made me think as well. So we've mentioned the climate, but we haven't mentioned environmental degradation, which is often a problem in places where lots of people are going. So you talked about overcrowding and that being negative for the people who live in those places. But if we're talking about overcrowding at places where people don't live, for example, Machu Picchu, for example, the Rainbow Mountains nearby, Ayers Rock, these are all places that are suffering under the feet of so many people visiting them. And I should call Ayers Rock Uluru, its Aboriginal name, which a lot of this comes to respecting the history of a place. It was in 2019 that climbing Uluru was banned, wasn't it? Because the Aboriginal people who live there and respect the rock didn't want that people to continue to climb it because it's sacred to them, which we tend to ignore because perhaps we don't understand those cultural implications. And the same from Machu Picchu, as far as I can gather from local stories, it's something that is a bucket list destination rather than a meaningful spiritual one, perhaps. But let's come back to the economic question, because you mentioned briefly about how the economics of tourism isn't as simple as bringing investment to the place. And I wanted also to mention that because at the beginning I spoke about how local businesses would be pushed out for big chains. It does feel ironic or uncomfortable perhaps if you go on holiday, you can fly halfway around the world and still get a McDonald's, and you understand why that happens because you want to feel comfortable and familiar, and people like that stuff. But it also feels a bit of a shame that you wouldn't be able to or want to experience the local cuisine. And it does just mean that local businesses and what makes a place unique is being pushed out to be replaced by more international chains, which has the effect of taking money out of that area rather than putting it in. I don't know if you have anything to add on that particular point, Ben.
Again, I would just be careful that we sort of try and separate out the issues a little bit. I think globalization is one thing, and that happens around the world with or without tourism, really. Um, and tourism may be a driver of it because people think that there's an expectation that international visitors demand international tastes. But I think that actually that is an assumption that doesn't necessarily hold up to much scrutiny. But it's an assumption that people make. But also, are these multinational or at least global chains, are they being used only by visitors or are they being used by residents too? I think that's probably the key here. If services are being developed and it really feels that they're being developed just for visitors, that's where the real problems lie. And we've seen lots of good examples. I'm now thinking of Amsterdam with at least the principles that they're trying to develop tourism around now are always that if they're going to develop something for a visitor, with a visitor in mind, then they will also make sure that it's equally of interest to locals. So an event or something, they would be like, okay, this would be great to have this event, but is this something that our our community is going to enjoy just as much as anyone that we want to bring in? So I think that that's part one. I would maybe just kind of add to that that there was definitely something to talk about around this because what we see is that international companies have the resources, the finance, the skill sets, the connections to set up all of these things in another country, where that country itself may not have those things readily available themselves. So again, let's be nuanced about it because sometimes that's really useful. So if you're just starting out as a destination, you might be quite reliant on some of this external knowledge and resourcing. So it might actually be wonderful that you're getting all of this foreign direct investment, as we would call it. People are screaming out for foreign direct investment, and that's great. We're getting all of this lovely money coming in from whichever global hotel chain or whatever it is that we're talking about here. And they can set up all these lovely plush complexes, etc., etc. We're getting all of this investment and infrastructure for tourism that might be needed, but that's you've got to then manage that and think about how you're going to progress from that first stages to other stages. You are basically building barriers to local participation in tourism at this point. And local entrepreneurs haven't got access to that same finance. They can't do what these international companies are doing. So that's when some sort of facilitation is needed, and that's where you need to start seeking that kind of balance that you need to to transition more and more into kind of like a broader type of tourism that is going to benefit more and more people.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's focus on that a little bit more then, the benefits of tourism, because I'm sure that all of us who are involved in, who are here on the call have had travel experiences that are very positive for us individually. And also, like you say, Ben, communities do rely on people coming to visit and spending their money. So there are benefits to tourism. So let's kind of explore that a little bit. So yeah, first of all, what tourism brings us, the traveller. We often look at the way that being in other countries, being part of other cultures, makes you more kind to your fellow human, makes you more aware of your place in the world. We can discover something about ourselves as well as something about the world, which is really important and can help us become better global citizens. There's also an argument that if you see something, you're more likely to want to protect it, which is also really important at this stage of the climate crisis. And it's also fun. It's also fun. Let's not deny that travel isn't fun. It's lovely to go on holiday. I will be extolling the virtues of the UK a lot by the end of this meeting, the end of this event. But there are certain things that we don't necessarily have here in the UK that we might want to see in other places, and that's a lovely thing too. So yeah, we'll be talking about that a little bit more towards the end. But these are things that we would like to be able to continue to access. Ben, I don't know if you have if you can also summarize like some of the benefits of tourism that you see through your work.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, economic is the main thing that everyone talks about, and I think we've got to accept that first and foremost for a destination, it's an economic activity, and therefore destinations need to benefit economically. And I think a lot of so when I mentioned that we sort of talk about equity at the Travel Foundation, a lot of that is in terms of making sure that it's not just the few who are benefiting from that, but the many. because because of the burdens that I was talking about as well, they are shared among the many, and so the benefits really need to be shared among the many too. Um, so I think we shouldn't, we should definitely recognize and accept the huge kind of economic benefits, not just of visitor spend, but of the workforce that then come to a place, and then they become taxpayers and spenders too. Then the investment that I mentioned before, the inward investment and that sort of thing. I mean, it's quite a remarkable way for many places to fairly quickly and easily develop their economies compared to many other kind of industries that they could be considering. And actually, if you do compare tourism to other industries, often it can feel quite favorable. And if the other options are things like mining and that sort of thing. Um, I mean, other than than the obvious economic one that everyone talks about. I mean, I would just say, I mean, you mentioned some things that were a benefit for the traveller there, which I think are also the benefit for the host potentially. So having a place in the feeling like you have a sense of place in the world. I think if tourism is done right, you feel like, isn't it great that people want to come and visit my town, city, wherever. It's obviously, a beautiful place and people recognize it and we're not insignificant. So there's a sort of a sense of place generally that I think it has a value. Then if you think about the fact that it may provide you with all sorts of services that wouldn't otherwise be there. Because like we say, if we can develop services that are used both by visitors and by residents, then that's a great way of developing tourism. And it would mean that that there will be more buses, there will be more nightlife, there will be more retail, there will be more of all sorts of things that can benefit the people who are living there just as much as the people who are visiting. And of course, I mean, there are environmental opportunities from tourism too. We know, that there are national parks that really need to survive through tourism, that there are kind of conservation programs that really rely on tourism kind of entry fees and that sort of thing. I think, all of the areas where you might sort of put a cross by them for potential kind of damage from tourism are often also potential opportunities for real positive impact too. And so that's the frustration really, because I think people see tourism as this potential for this force for good around the world, and yet we're all seeing these damaging impacts too, and the reality of this sort of I suppose mass mainstream tourism and the numbers that we're looking at in the concentrations that we're looking at causing problems.
Yeah, I think the issue of conservation and the national parks aspect that you just mentioned, that's the trickiest one for us at Flight Free UK, because of course what we do is encourage people to travel without flying, and it's very difficult to get to a lot of those national parks without flying. So that's something that I think is the hardest to solve when it comes to this conversation of over tourism and conservation and protection. So yeah, if we probably won't solve that one tonight, but um, so I wanted to move to our kind of conclusion to the discussion, which is looking at solutions. And just to remind everybody that once we've finished this section of the event, it will be over to you for questions. So if you do have questions, pop them in the chat, or when it comes to that point, make sure that you're on the chat so you can put your questions forward. But yeah, let's turn to those solutions then. So Matilda, I'm going to come back to you because you've been looking at this article which is talking about the Balearic Islands and what they're doing there to reduce the amount of booze that people are drinking.
Yeah, so the article spoke about how the Balearic Islands launched one of Europe's toughest crackdowns on alcohol-fueled party tourism. So basically, throughout, there have been noise complaints, brawls, clashes between tourists and residents, and increases in rent prices. And basically, the Balearic authorities had had enough, so they created a crackdown in 2024, which meant basically they did alcohol bans in the street in like high population areas for tourists. There were bans from selling alcohol at 9:30 p.m. And also even in all-inclusive hotels, they did a six drink serving limit. And this article basically looked at um, the crackdown that had been put in place in 2024 and looked at it at 1 year on. So this is in 2025, and it said that basically serious incidents had dropped by 90% in Magaluf and 80% in, I'm probably going to say this wrong, but San Antonio, which is really significant.
Yeah, really significant. Um, Thanks for bringing that out. Was there anything else in that article that you wanted to share?
I don't think so. Not so much about
No.
the positive results.
Yeah, it was a really interesting article, wasn't it? So just to point out, that's an article again in The Guardian, um, written by Dima Ajib, who is the MA in tourism lecturer at the Westminster Business School. So please do look that up after the event. Matthew, was there anything in the articles that you were looking at that explores potential solutions? It's okay if there wasn't.
Sorry, I'm just trying to find the unmute button again. Um, yeah, not there wasn't so much on solutions. The article about uh, tourist flats, I think there was something about oh, sorry, I've completely
That's
lost
okay.
it. Um, it
We can
was
come back to you if you want to.
yeah, if
Yeah.
I've got it written down somewhere.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah, I think something that people we've some areas have looked at is introducing a tourist tax. So Venice is famously one of those places, and there has been a this summer it was €5, and it was looking at extending that, which seems to have had a positive impact as well, not least just raising a load of money. So I think the government of Venice will have to decide how that money is best spent in order to invest in their city, which is famously extremely over touristed. But yeah, I don't have the stats actually in terms of what that tax, in terms of how much it maybe puts people off visiting. Ben, do you have any information about something like that, like a tourist tax, and if that does reduce the amount of people who actually go there?
I can basically tell you it doesn't.
Okay, so it really is just revenue then. Oh, Ben, I can't hear you, Ben. Matilda, can you hear Ben? No. Okay, try do turn it off and on again. Do the mute and then unmute, because that sometimes.
Any good?
Okay, you're really quiet now, but yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, perfect. You're back. Okay,
Okay,
continue.
right. So hopefully, I think you heard me say that they don't really,
It didn't
yeah,
have an impact. Yeah.
yeah, they don't really have an impact on deterring visitors. Um, but I think that I'm quite a supporter of tourism taxes because we're talking about benefits to residents. We're talking about trying to make sure that, a wider range of residents do benefit. And personally, I kind of think, well, what better way of doing that than a tax? And you can call it something nicer than a tax if you would rather, but essentially a fund that would come in and be used for common good, which some people might call a tax, but other people get very scared at that word. But yeah, I think that's a really sort of direct way of ensuring that some of the benefits of tourism are realized and spread out. And I mean, some people get very, very funny about how you spend your tax, that it has to be spent on, I don't know, tourism-y type stuff. I think let the locals decide what the priorities are for them, and I really don't mind if they think that a hospital is the most important thing to spend it on versus, I don't know, some kind of infrastructure thing or something like that.
Mm.
But yeah, I think that they're clearly becoming more and more common. And there was lots of screams and shouts from the industry when the first taxes came about. But I think everyone's chilled out a bit about them now and realised that it's just they're here to stay, and they're not going to kind of be this kind of huge sort of disaster for anyone really. I think it's just tourism more likely to pay its way, because obviously we're talking about temporary residents basically with visitors, and residents themselves, they pay their taxes to local authorities and all the rest of it. So I don't really see why visitors should be off the hook.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. And I suppose the next step in taxing tourists is banning them outright. So I'm sure people have heard about the ban on visitors at the beach that was made famous by the film of the same name, which after being inundated with visitors for many years, they closed it to tourists. And it was just maybe 2 years ago that it was reopened, because it was about letting the ecosystem recover. And now that needs to be carefully managed, which seemed to be an extreme response, but the only thing that was available, the only option that was available, faced with such damage that had happened to that particular location. So I don't know, Ben, if you know from your own opinion or from other measures that you've seen, if there are measures that actually do reduce the number of tourists, or at least reduce the pressure that tourists put on local places, somewhere between a tax and a ban, or something similar, or something different.
Yeah, global pandemics are really effective. So that's definitely one example of where tourism levels have really plummeted. I mean, other than that, I mean, it might actually just be worth saying that tourism is growing every year internationally, and it doesn't look really, saving global pandemic or similar. It's set to continue at that kind of level, 3 or 4% every year, basically meaning that we will double again by 2040. We're already at record levels, never seen as many tourists as we have today, and we will double that again by 2040. So over tourism isn't going to go away, not unless something that isn't really that obvious comes our way.
Mm.
Um, that we hope won't happen, to be honest. But what do we do? So, I mean, in terms of what can you do? I mean, there are obviously limits that you can put on. Some of those might be, there are certain places that I can't afford to go to. And I expect most people here won't be able to afford to go to.
Mhm.
And we understand that that is the way of the world, and that's a limit that we have. If it's not that we're being excluded as such, but we just don't have the money. So if we all saved up very, very hard, we might be able to do some of these things, but we probably won't. So that pricing people out is something that again, people don't like to hear, but actually, it's the way of the world. There's all sorts of things that we can't do because they're too expensive, and because there's a high demand for them, or it's an exclusive demand for them. So, I mean, that is an option. Obviously, there are other things that you can do. There are sort of ballot type approaches and that sort of thing for certain attractions, for instance. I think maybe Machu Picchu might have something similar to that actually.
Mm.
Um, and certainly sort of limits therefore on attractions. And again, that's very common. You can't, there's not infinite tickets for attractions to all sorts of places. So we've accepted the limits that are there. Of course, there's other things like flights in and flights out, accommodate bed nights, car parking spaces, all these things that are actual kind of capacity limits that will mean that you are essentially capping the numbers. Obviously, one of the issues that we've had with short-term letting is that had seemingly released a cap that was there in many places where there was only a certain number of places you could stay in a night, and suddenly that was kind of that limit was released. for better in some places and certainly for worse in many others. So yeah, there are definitely ways of doing it. What I will say is it's much harder to try to curb and reduce than it is to slow down and get it right first time. So all these places that now have over tourism, or are perceived to have over tourism, and whichever kind of version of that you want to talk about, they now have all sorts of stakeholders, some potentially quite powerful people who, well, and even those who aren't particularly powerful, but people who rely on tourism. And so they're all going to be shouting very loudly if you try and curb it. So it becomes much more difficult to introduce some of these measures once the problem's there, once you've opened Pandora's box. So I think that that's hopefully a really strong message for I mean, I would really mainly put this down to destinations. I think destinations are the key to this. And we can talk about the issues that we have there in terms of the destination management organizations, as they're called, often are there to promote a place, and the majority of their organization is a marketing organization. But if they can connect better with the rest of their destination and think about the ports, think about the infrastructure, think about all of the other things that they can put into place to manage visitors, then they've got to hope that they can kind of manage this well.
Yeah, before we go to questions, I want to offer the Flight Free UK version of the solution, such as it is, because we know that the top 3 tourist destinations for people who live here in the UK can all be reached without flying. So they are number 1, Spain, number 2, France, number 3, Italy. Now, a lot of the destinations in those countries you can get to in a day from the UK, which is brilliant. And most of them will be reachable within a couple of days. So 2 days down to the south of Spain from London, though. If you live in a different part of the UK, it'll be add an extra day. And southern Italy, same, and south of France, you can get from Fort William to Nîmes in the south of France in just over 24 hours, as we have featured on our website. One of our lovely social media officer did that journey recently. So that's a story on our website if you want to know how to do it. But yeah, the idea here, something that we're trying to promote, especially for that kind of very local tourism. And of course, like I hinted at, this isn't going to address the longer haul stuff and the conservation question. But if we are traveling within Europe, especially near Europe, if we remove the flight and if we take sustainable transport, we can still go to places that rely on our tourism. We can still go to the places that are typically over touristed, Barcelona, Venice, etc. But because it takes a bit longer and it costs a bit more, even though, caveat, it doesn't always, we just do it less. So, personal example, I'm going to Barcelona this year for the first time. I've never been to Barcelona before. And I probably won't go again on a regular, at least for another few years, because it's an investment in time, in money, and in planning, much more so than if you book a flight. So by virtue of that, the places that are benefiting from our tourism in Barcelona, for example, are still benefiting, but it does, if everybody were to do that, it would completely remove the overcrowding of that area. Of course, it's a simplistic answer, and that kind of change just doesn't happen overnight, but that's it. It feels like that's part of what we need to aim towards, and that's certainly what we at Flight Free UK encourage people to do. So by all means, still go to the places that you want to go, still lie on that beach, but if you go there by train or coach, that's another option. It's a one way of reducing that burden of the tourism. I wonder if we can go to questions now, because we have 20 minutes left in the scheduled event. So we're scheduled to finish at 8:15, and we've had a couple of questions in through the chat, which is interesting. So if you have any thoughts or questions, please put them in. And Matilda, do you want to see if you can read out some of the questions that have come through?
Yeah, so Jonathan and Jill said that they would like to hear people's views on carbon offsetting, especially with regard to flights.
Okay, good question. Ben, do you have thoughts on carbon offsetting on behalf of the Travel Foundation?
I do.
Please share.
Okay, so I would say that we should all be very happy that people are investing in nature, but I think that we shouldn't be trying to connect that to polluting the environment. Um, so um, uh, so I would say, let's focus that, there are some good initiatives out there that are supporting nature-based solutions and that sort of thing, but I don't see why we need to start calling that anything to do with offsetting. That's to do with investing in nature. Over on the other side, we got a big job to actually stop pulling fossil fuels out of the ground and kind of wise up to what's going on in the world. And we've got to invest in a whole load of things on that side of things. So let's start putting money there too. I mean, offsetting just doesn't add up for a long-term solution. We looked at this. We did a report called Envisioning Tourism in 2030 and Beyond, which was trying to actually demonstrate, is it even possible to halve carbon emissions by 2030 and get to net zero by 2050. And we just had to throw offsetting out. It's a kind of a bit of a non-starter, because the closer we get to 2050, and the closer we get to and therefore a net zero world, offsetting is just not even there. You can't purchase offsets because most of the time that's buying someone else's reductions in carbon, and that's going to be harder and harder to do. And if you're then going to go and talk about like planting trees and that kind of stuff, there's not enough worlds to go around for all of this stuff. So we've just got to stop the pollution and invest in nature and not offset.
That's a really good summary and very close to our own take on it. Thanks, Ben. And could you perhaps send the link to that report? Because what I will do at the end of the event is send the links to everything we've been speaking about in this event to attendees who are here on the night and who had registered as well, who haven't attended on the night. So I think that would be a really useful resource.
Right.
And yeah, to add to that, at Flight Free UK, we also don't recommend that people use offsetting, and definitely don't call it that, because that gives the impression that your emissions are accounted for or that they don't count. And as a behavior change organization, we know that offsetting it doesn't change behavior. It even to some extent, it gives us license to continue our polluting behavior. What we really need to do is change our behavior. And if we then, I mean, as you made the very good point, Ben, we need to be investing in nature, and we should do both. We need to reduce our emissions and make those investments in those nature-based solutions. What we try to push with people is push the idea that if you do have to take a flight, because that there are many occasions where you would need to, we can debate the meaning of the word need in another event perhaps, but if that's something that is happening, rather than offset it, own the emissions. If you really need to take that flight, then own the emissions. If you don't need to take the flight to the point where you would want to be offsetting it to make up for it, then perhaps it's not so necessary to take it in the first place. there's always an option to make a donation to a charity that fights climate change, like Flight Free UK. So maybe that's a solution, rather than offsetting. Donate to a charity of your choice. Um, okay, any other questions, Matilda?
Yeah, Haley put is a sort of two-part question. They said, how do holidaymakers identify places that genuinely want and would benefit from tourism? And are there certain types of accommodation that are better or worse?
I think you've probably got a good answer for this as well, Ben, because I know lots of what you focus on is what to do when you get to the location. That will be good for the
Yeah.
community. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, okay. Uh, I think it would probably make sense to say that um, going off season, if that's an option, is good news, generally. And going to maybe lesser known. I mean, people often sort of look to second cities rather than capital cities, that sort of thing. Lesser known destinations is tends to be kind of encouraged as well. Um, I mean, we've all got to be a. I always feel that I have to be nuanced with every answer I give in a way because, of course, that are we just spreading problems all over the place? If I am in a very over touristed um, city, say like when I was living in London, you would avoid the centre for the peak seasons of August in particular, and go nowhere near the centre. So if you then find that it's just as busy all year round, then you really have lost your place. So again, these kind of comments are always context specific, and that's probably the main message actually is that get to know your destination. It's a bit of a boring answer because there's no easy way of doing this, but like research your destination, research your hotels. If they are hotels that care about sustainability, then you should be able to tell fairly quickly, I think, from looking at websites and that sort of thing. There will be a lot there that not just on a sustainability page, and it will look like it's been updated and it will be kind of embedded in the ethos of the place. I mean, I would say, I do think it's probably a good rule of thumb to try to book locally owned places, but I mean, again that's not necessarily always the case because sometimes you can get some really responsible hotel accommodations maybe even more so because they are sort of they have the resources and they have the maybe the scrutiny even of an international operator. I do know of examples where the big, ugly, large hotel has actually got a way better footprint per visitor, per guest than the boutique, so-called sustainable, sort of lovely little hotel thing. So that's why
Mm.
this is sort of slightly annoying and complicated. I mean, you can go and you can try and focus on certification, but again, so much of our industry is small businesses, SMEs. Most of those guys aren't going to be doing certification. It's too expensive. It's too time consuming. So I'm afraid really annoyingly, there's not much of a shortcut other than I think to do some research and look around and see if you can kind of land on a place, go for recommendations, all that kind of stuff. I think that tends to be my advice. But the money you spend is the most important thing.
Mm.
So if you can spend that money, in terms of how can I have a good impact, the main thing is how can you spend your money? If you can do that well, then I think you're doing a really good job.
And are we saying avoid Airbnb?
No, I don't think we can. I think we should be really, I'm not here to support Airbnb. I think there's all sorts of problems there.
Mm.
But there are places that need there are places that aren't built around hotels where for instance, there are places outside of cities where there's very little. Well, there's uh, issues around young people moving away and all sorts of things like that. Whereas, you can start to maybe use some of that stock, some of that housing stock, as for tourism. It might then start to bring more life back into a place. For instance, that's just one example. And obviously, if you can kind of regulate, I think definitely regulated, and be mindful. It depends where you're going as well, right? So if you're going to Barcelona, I think it would be really nice if you could be really, as you will be, Anna, like, you're going to stay at an Airbnb? I don't know. So just be really, really careful in some of these places. It's hard. I mean, I'm always worried that I am very, hypocritical. I'm a human, just like, with who does stupid things and has two sets of values, at once that seem to conflict all the time. And sometimes I would really much prefer to stay in, an Airbnb or something like that because, I've got my family and I don't want to stay in a hotel and I don't want to, and I don't want to go in a big all inclusive and all those sorts of things. But I think we just got to try our best to be, just careful of the context.
Yeah, fair enough. Um, okay, another question, Matilda?
So John Anderson said, I hitchhiked around Europe. Is that now possible?
I wonder if I can come in there with anything helpful because I know that hitchhiking is not nearly what it once was, but I think it is still possible. And the reason is because I have experienced, not myself, but some of my uh, friends and colleagues who do still hitchhike. And one of them is Helen Coffey, who was the head of travel at The Independent, who took our flight free challenge and had a wonderful time doing it. Hasn't flown since, which is amazing. And she, in her book, she talks about hitchhiking. Her book's called Zero Altitude, by the way. I highly recommend it. And yes, she talks about hitchhiking just in the last few years, and that is still a viable way of traveling, even though perhaps not as common as it once was. And also Helen's colleague at The Independent, Simon Calder, who many of you will know of. He talks a lot about flying, but he also talks a lot about other forms of travel. He is a very big supporter of Flight Free UK, which might surprise some of you, but it's true. He's given us a lot of support, and he, speaking of offsets, he told me once that his version of offsetting is every flight he takes, he then does a hitchhiking trip, because and he makes a very good point. That is the absolute most zero carbon journey you can take, because even if you travel by train, it's still going to create emissions somewhere down the line. So I think that's a lovely point. And yeah, if you ever want to have some practical advice on hitchhiking, Simon Calder's your man.
I don't know is it the service? I'm just wondering, like, is there an app or something these days that you can use? I don't know if that was what was being referred to in the chat. Sorry, I just lost it. But you imagine that just like when Airbnb started, it was kind of like couch surfing or whatever, and it kind of made that possible. I bet there's an app that does this hitchhiking thing for us now, and that would be great. I mean, similar things. I mean, it used to be possible to go on freight um, ships, across the Atlantic and that sort of thing, and I think that that's become a little bit harder now. But
Yeah,
for
since
whatever
COVID,
reason,
most
yeah,
companies are no longer offering it. Yeah.
yeah. But I mean, just things like that. These are quite interesting. Kind of, yeah, opportunities maybe for someone to, make some, find out why we can't do these things and make them easier again.
Mm. Okay, Maria, Matilda, sorry. Should we have one more question and then we will? Oh, but also Matthew, we never came back to you to hear what that solution was in that article, so we can come back to you as well. So yeah, Matilda, is there one more question for us to answer?
Well, there was obviously the one about service or service. I've not heard of it before.
Mhm.
And they asked if you'd heard of it. I quickly looked it up and I can explain like the website if
Please
that's
do.
helpful.
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
Um, so it its tagline is sort of a network for global friendship, and it says, embracing more than 100 countries, Servas provides a network for its members to make contact, to build friendships, and to broaden our understanding of the world. By connecting as hosts, travelers, or supporters, online or in person, we promote peace and tolerance while encouraging environmentally sustainable meetings and lifestyles with less ecological impact.
Wow, that sounds absolutely perfect, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Right on message. Thank you for that. Matthew, should we come back to you for the if if there were other solutions mentioned in your articles?
Yeah, so it wasn't quite a direct solution, but it was specifically in Lisbon. More than 6,600 residents recently signed a call for a binding referendum on whether the city should ban tourist flats in residential blocks.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Was there an outcome, or is it yet to be
No,
decided? Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of taking us back to the whole taxes or bans, and yeah, I'm sure there's a mixture of those types of things that, and what we can do is keep an eye on these measures that various areas are taking and see what the effect is. Ben, you're probably going to say it won't have any effect, but
No, I just think that, I mean, I just think it's important. Definitely part of the solution is to allow communities to have more say in
mm,
how tourism is developed. They are a
mhm,
natural kind of barometer and kind of balance to the other side of things, which is basically, capitalism, I suppose, really, and at least business interests, let's just say. So, obviously, if there is, if some people can invest and make money, they are going to want to do it. And I think it's up to the destination well, it's up to we need to empower the destination, let's say, and then it's up to the destination to be its
mm,
own steward, I think. But certainly,
yeah.
it's not just a case of pushing it onto them and it's their problem. We have to kind of make sure that the system allows those sort of checks and balance to be brought into place.
Yeah. That feels like a very lovely conclusion. Do you have any other thoughts to add to kind of wrap up the whole topic, or do you want to leave it there?
I mean, not really, not particularly. I just go back to the fact that we are going to end up with a 4 billion tourists, international tourists, and that's not even talking domestic at that point, by 2050. So I think we just need to make sure that we have enough places, we have enough sort of net zero types of travel available, because if we're doing all of this movement, we need to do that in a way that doesn't pollute the world. And I think we need to make sure that we design tourism so that it no matter which tourists and which visitors are attracted to a place, there's always going to be a benefit there. And I think some of the examples that you guys have been giving, like, it's not. I don't think it's okay to say, oh, it's a problem. Brits are drinking too much or something. Actually, design it out. Like, give them only. You can only have 6 drinks. And that, like, if you give a Brit 20 drinks, they're going to behave badly. Do you know what I mean? So let's just kind of design these things out. And then we don't have any of these issues of there's a better type of traveler and there's a better type of tourist, and that
Mm.
kind of thing. It's just you visit, it's good news.
Great. Thanks for that conclusion, Ben. Really good. Really good points, and thank you so much for your contributions.
For
Um,
having me.
I realised we didn't even talk about UK tourism, and that was supposed to be part of my proposal for one version of the solution. Given that there are lots of places in the UK that used to be full of visitors and now no longer, in favour of those places that we can get cheap flights to. So part of the solution, such as it is, I think solution is probably the wrong word actually, but to explore those wonderful parts of our own island that we often overlook because it's so easy to book a flight. Whereas, yeah, there are some absolutely wonderful places in the UK which could very well benefit from our investment and our tourist money. So thank you everyone for coming to our event. As mentioned, we run events throughout the year, partly exploring travel, flight-free travel, partly exploring some of the more gritty aspects of our work, which this one probably counts as. If you want to keep up to date with future events, you can follow us on social media, or you can sign up to our events newsletter, which you can do so via our website, and which is flightfree.co.uk. And all the links of the things we've been speaking about this evening will be sent to you afterwards. And please do pass on the recording to any of your colleagues or friends or contacts who you think might like to watch it afterwards. We'll be uploading to our YouTube and Facebook channels. So thank you so much for attending. Thank you, Ben, again, for joining us and giving us your expertise. Thanks, Matthew, Matilda from the team, for keeping everything on the road. And thank you so much, everyone, for attending. And see you hopefully at another event soon, and good night. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Good night. Thanks, Anna.
Thanks, Ben.